Hi, welcome to another episode of Meet the Author, or should I also say Meet the Artist today. Today we have Patricia Rosoff, and she wrote the book Innocent Eye. It's an art book. Patricia Rosoff received her BFA in painting from the Rhode Island School of Design and a Master of Fine Arts from Hartford Art School. For many years, the chair of the Creative Arts Department at Kingswood Oxford School, where since 1975 she has taught studio art and art history. She now serves as the school's academic Dean of Humanities. She has also been a longtime contributor to the journal Arts and was critic for the Hartford Advocate newspaper, 1994 to 2007. Her essays appear often in Arts New England and the magazine Sculpture. Welcome to the show,
Thank
Patricia.
You. Nice to be here.
My pleasure. So tell us about the title, Innocent Eye, and it says a passionate look at contemporary art. So what's the book about, and what does the term innocent eye mean?
Well, innocent eye is a phrase that sort of came out of the post-impressionist period. Well, actually, the Romantic period, because this rather strident and sometimes bellicose artist, Gustave Courbet, as he would rail against the stodginess of the French Royal Academy, or the French Academy, would say, I don't need what they need to teach me. All you need is an innocent eye. You just go out and look at the world and render what you see, and don't tell me how to do it. And so innocent eye became kind of a rallying cry for the artists who were trying to forge new ground and break away from the academic traditions, which had really kind of rigidified by the mid-19th century, and sort of made the viewing public accept only 3 or 4 formulas of how things were done, certain subject matter, certain treatments, certain styles, certain characteristics. They were all kind of entrenched in the academy. So the innocent eye was pretty much the way that the Impressionists did. Monet went out, he stood in the landscape, he painted in front of that landscape. He didn't take it back to his studio and make it pretty. Mm-hmm. And he really resisted that kind of salon idea that you make it pretty or you make it into art. He took what he saw and he painted what he saw, and he painted it the way he saw it and tried to render it so that the sensation of it seeing it would be given to the viewer. And so it wasn't received very well. There was an art critic at the time that saw the first Impressionist exhibition, or the Salon du Refusé, mm-hmm. and he wrote in his review something to the effect of, don't go there. It will make you mad. Mm. I personally witnessed someone who came into this room and these garish, bright paintings deranged him. He ran screaming down the stairs, out into the street, and started to bite people.
Was that true?
Well, I'm not sure. I somehow just would think not, although they do have warnings outside of light shows that have strobe lights, and mm-hmm. if you have epilepsy, that right. you shouldn't go in there. Right. And so I think that the effect of Impressionism, to us now, Impressionism is so beautiful and so acceptable, was so bright and, day glow, that it was quite stunning to people used to those beautiful, dark, tonal paintings, which were the accepted
you say
style.
That. So you think it might have caused a seizure, or they thought it might cause a seizure?
Well, that's what he was saying.
Oh, that's
but it was the kind of, the Impressionists were the favorite punching bags with the critics. Everybody loved to get a piece of them.
Because, they tried to say, in the end, that Van Gogh suffered from epilepsy.
Yeah,
but it's
lead
not
poisoning.
Conclusive.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting.
But, so it was, the shock of the new.
All the lights.
Yeah. So Innocent Eye was a non-academic. It's how to be non-academic mm-hmm. instead of learning how it's supposed to be.
And you pronounce his name Courbet or Courbet?
Courbet.
Courbet. And he was the first Impressionist?
He was not an Impressionist. He wouldn't have nothing to do with the Impressionists.
Mm-hmm.
They looked at him as a kind of a father figure.
Okay.
Because he was a break with the Academy.
Oh, I
but
see.
he finally became accepted by the Academy, won awards and prizes and such, and he wanted nothing to do with these horrible children that everyone hated. People used to make sport of the Impressionists. They used to buy tickets just so they could point and laugh at the Impressionist exhibits.
Well, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. No,
Wow.
it was a tremendous, every time they showed, it was a scandal. And people would go just because they hated it so much. They would all go to point and laugh and bring their children to point and laugh.
So it was
the best show in town.
It was the best show in town. Wow.
Not because they liked it.
So getting away from Impressionism, because your book is after Impressionism.
Yeah.
What is the difference between contemporary art and modern art?
I think that's a good question. Because you'll see, I had a colleague actually ask me that question, because there are museums called the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and there's a Museum of Contemporary Art. In San Francisco, there's one of each. And contemporary art museums are a very different story. Modern art is now, with a capital M, the work that we call from the beginning of the 20th century, which would be Expressionism.
Because the Museum of Modern Art in New York has been around for a while.
I know. Well,
Not so modern anymore.
Well, it's up to the probably mid-century.
Right.
So beginning with Expressionism, which would be Matisse and the Fauves and like that. Another group they didn't like at all. Fauve means wild beasts. But the Fauves and the Cubists and the Pointillists and those guys, that's the beginning of modernism and the beginning of abstraction and the beginning of what I would classify or call formalism, concern with painting as design, or not as design, but as composition, as kind of visual elements of things that happen in the retina, learning the language to talk about composition as itself and not as a carrier and conveyor of illusionism.
Okay.
Contemporary art, however, is not formal in nature. It's more conceptual in nature, so that it's conveying meaning, it's conveying ideas, it's conveying visual forms, not as designs on a flat canvas using color and designing with analytical language, but more bringing it out into the streets, bringing it more into performance, breaking down the barriers between art forms, and all of that. And so it's much more freewheeling,
so that
and it doesn't think of itself as aesthetic.
Could that include dance, if it's in that respect?
Well, performance, but performance art, there's performance art and dance, but then the performance artists I talk about in here, you see them in galleries, you don't see them in theaters or at Rockefeller Center. So it's framing. There's a fellow, what does he do? He'll come and do breakfast at your house. He sort of frames real life. And so he takes those things that you never think about, and by formalizing it in a certain way and ritualizing it in a certain way, he, it's Kinmont, he makes you suddenly stop and pay attention to really small things.
So from what I'm listening
but
to
it's not like about aesthetics and making a beautiful picture or a beautiful sculpture or a beautiful building.
What I'm hearing from what you're saying, and you can add this to your definition, is that there is a movement on the one hand to change your life and make it better in some way, or there's a movement to make you smarter and understand beauty and aesthetics. How would that fit into your
what is it?
Artists and what they're
one
doing?
of the things they said about abstraction, which was the big kind of impulse of the early teens and 20s and into the 30s, was that in troubling times, when the world is distressing to look out at, people create abstract art because it becomes a pure place that you can go to retreat from. And so the period of the First World War, which was a disaster on every level, and even when it was finished, this war to end all wars, they knew that it wasn't finished and there was more to do. And then there was the between the war period, and then the Second World War, which was another huge, horrible, stupid disaster. All of the hopes that the progressives had for technology and progress and industry, and we'd make the world a better and more perfect place, and all of that late, the 19th century thought we could solve everything. So we come into the 20th century, what do we find? Better ways to bomb each other, better ways to pollute the river, better, all of those promising things came with a dark side that was really quite evil, and the impact on humankind was horrible. And so the art of that period becomes aspirational in an abstract plane, where it takes you away from the troubles.
Because you mentioned that, so that you met one of the people in the book is Kandinsky, and he actually fit in between the First and Second World Wars.
Yeah.
And he was in Germany, correct?
Well, he's Russian.
Russian, okay.
And he was the child of, his parents were both involved in music. I think they were musicians or
Bauhaus.
conductors.
Okay.
And he, too, and so he went eventually to Germany, but he had another
But Kandinsky did go to Germany.
He did, yes.
Oh,
He
okay,
taught
I
in
said
the
that.
Bauhaus.
Okay.
But he was an academic in Russia. And late in life, like in his 30 or something, he decided to become an artist. And so he started being an artist at that point.
Was that related to what you're talking about after post-First World War, before Second World War? You think that
I think getting out of Russia after,
if influenced his
after the
art?
teens.
So we actually have a painting by Kandinsky here. You brought a photo. Can you show us some about that and talk about that a little
Well,
bit?
this is sort of typical Kandinsky before the Bauhaus. His Bauhaus period becomes a lot more straight edge with rulers and flatter shapes. This is much more painterly with thick paint and, explosions of color. But Kandinsky, this is called an improvisation. It's interesting. His music background is really important because music is nothing but abstract. You can't have a representational song, to describe something. Music creates, like poetry does, it's sort of by association. It creates feelings and memories and stuff. And so he thought of color, and he wrote about color in terms of music, rhythm, like all of the analytical language. We use an abstraction to talk about what we're doing. Our musical terms, we talk about rhythm, we talk about pitch, we talk about tone, we talk, things can be sort of staccato, things can be legato. The ways that you talk about sound, because sound isn't visual, when applied to color, make tremendous sense to me. Like when I look at a painting, colors sing, and it's not any good unless they're singing either. And they have, he talked about yellow being like brass instruments, and greens being like cellos and deep wooden instruments, and some sounds blare, and blues are sort of calming. And so he described color in terms of feeling, in terms of affect, not in terms of description. So like you don't paint a red ball. Red is there not to describe a ball, in fact. And if it does describe a ball, you immediately lose the impact of what red might be if it was disassociated with the ball. So he's using color for how it resonates on the soul. He wrote a book concerning the spiritual in art.
Yes, and you mentioned that in your book.
And he uses color in that way. I read that he was quite a proselytizer, and he was a real blowhard in many ways.
And I see his paintings in many places.
Yes. Oh, he was fabulous. And the thing was, he was
influential. I don't understand why he was so
preaching a whole
influential.
new song. Well, because he gave us a language. He was a painter who gave us a language to describe what in the heck we were doing. And most of what you do as an artist is intuitive, even when you're describing, like paintings have feelings. You
So
know
he was
that,
the one that
but
was-
you don't. How do you make it do that? How do you talk about that? Nobody did. They used to talk about it in terms of, does it describe that? Is the proportion right? Is it, follow the golden mean?
As a technique and not as an emotion.
Skills and as traditions and as descriptives. All of those illusionistic devices that were developed in Western art.
That's interesting you mention that, because as I told you before the program, I'm working on the art of John Singer Sargent, a movie I'm putting out. But in the first chapter you talk about Monet, and they were friends. And it's funny because one of the critique that you talked about the critique at the Salon, and both Monet and Sargent had their stuff in the Salon and also in the Renaissance and the Impressionist shows. But one of the critiques about Singer Sargent against him for Monet was that Sargent does things in a technique type of way without emotion, whereas Monet was able to put emotion into his art. How does that fit in with Kandinsky and what you wrote about what you did?
Monet would spin in his grave if you characterized him as putting emotion in his work.
He brought his paintings to life. Maybe that's what the guy said.
That's
He might not have liked it.
Right. Well, the thing is that the people that came after Monet, the post-impressionists, Cézanne, Van Gogh, Gauguin, and Seurat, the four major post-impressionists, all of them sort of began with the premise of Impressionism. Brilliant, bright, full volume color, no tones, no black, no brown. And what do they call it? Reflexive painting. You look and respond, You know, you paint in a kind of a, I guess, a subconscious way rather than a deliberate way. And they gave up the illusionistic space of the Academy and that whole tradition. So they sort of began where Impressionism began, but they all felt that Impressionism was too dispassionate and it left too much out. So that two of those guys, both Van Gogh and Gauguin, felt that there was no feeling in Monet. And they said of Monet, he was just an eye. Oh, what an eye. But just an eye. So for my students, I draw an eyeball on the board, and I put a little hand with a paintbrush in it.
So they wouldn't say he would not have said there's emotion in it,
so
although other
Van
people
Gogh
might have
said,
felt that
you
way.
know, I'm not just observing like a photograph. And that's the thing, all those guys, Monet wanted to become like a camera, unmediated by academic concerns, just to open your lens, take it in, record what you see, don't think about it, don't interpret it. And that's what he was trying to do. That's what he was going away from. But Van Gogh is saying, how can you leave the heart out? That's like the best part. And so he wanted to pour his heart into it. He wanted you to feel the throbbing of his reds. So
probably the review critique was because he painted lilies and water lilies, and maybe that's where the emotion and the happiness came about.
Well, I think where the emotion and happiness comes out is that the viewer looking at it gets those things.
Right.
I don't think that you can think about it as Monet's motivation.
Well, I don't think he was correct about Sargent either. But
right. I mean, the thing is, the people write about these. It's not like you sign up, you know, you want to be a card-carrying impressionist. So you pay your dues and they give you the rules and then you paint like that. That's not how it works. You just paint. Like you got a fish in your craw and you have to just get it out there. And then somebody else sitting down over coffee someplace else decides what that is and what that means.
So I want to read something about your book because you talk about representation, and in my feeling, your writing in a way is representing the art that you're looking at. So I'm going to read something in the book that you wrote about Jacqueline Gorevitch. So before I read the piece, maybe show a painting, a picture, and say something about her, and then we'll read a piece from the book. Well,
Jacqueline was an artist. I first saw her work. I didn't meet her for some years in a small, tiny gallery in Avon. And this painting, I'm not sure if this painting was in it or not, but it was paintings like this. And she'd go up in an airplane. She would sketch out the windows as she was flying over,
So we have a picture in the book about that. In a way, if you can see it or not, but...
So from those sketches, then she would develop the larger paintings. And they're sort of like roadmaps of what she sees. And, one of the things they say about perspective, and people miss perspective. A lot of viewers think this is just flat. Flat as pancakes, they said about Manet. But someone else's response to that was when you're in a satellite looking back at the Earth, there ain't no depth. It's like flat.
Flat, okay.
And so looking down on the Earth, you don't have a vanishing point and a horizon and a sky. You're looking down on a flat canvas, and there's tonal changes, and there's things that move across it, and so on. And so looking at the world not in perspectival ways, but in other ways. You still perceive shapes and
So
lines.
at a distance, some will say you gain perspective, but in this case, you're losing
well, you
the
gain
perspective.
abstract perspective, perhaps.
Okay, you gain abstract. So let's read what you wrote about her. And I really, as an author, I really think this is great. Ultimately, hers is a truant realism, too buoyant to be pinned down, a realism that denies the conventions of perspective. The truth of the matter is that from a bird's eye view, there can be no such thing as a vanishing point, lest it be humanity itself, invisible from that distance. At 10,000 feet, everything is reduced to a map of lines and vaguely textured shapes, and the topography of a river valley mimics the patterning of a polished geode or the veining of a leaf. What a great word, veining of a leaf. Similarly, under Gurevich's hand, earthly particulars leap together in wonderfully graphic shorthand. This is a work that conjures sense memory via the finest adjustments of color, veiled in dusty washes, tinged with sudden heat, and leaking fire under the mist. That's fantastic. That's poetic. Beautiful.
Thank you. Well, it's hard to, for me, I came to abstraction sort of late. I was a figurative painter for decades. And I was in grad school, actually, that I had to grapple with it. And I had never liked cubism. I mean, I'm a colorist, so I don't understand why you'd make it, if you were going to make a painting, why you'd make it brown. I just thought that
You mean
was
like
Cubism
what's it
is in
called?
shades
Make
of
it
earth
brown.
tones and silvers and grays. I get now that they're really beautiful colors, but it's like pewter, copper.
what about sepia? What would
See,
you-
yeah, but see, I think of color as full spectrum, full blown, knock you dead color.
Okay.
Like that for
So-
me is great fun and had great power. So the subtleties of tonal color was lost on me. So, but I had to figure it out, and it was a barrier for me not understanding cubism, because cubism is sort of the doorway to 20th century art. And I hadn't gone through that door, and so it was only when I was brought to it, sort of kicking and screaming, in grad school, and I had a catharsis and became an abstract painter. It's like when I finally got it, it was like the whole wall came down,
So,
and I left
Since we
it behind.
mentioned about you liking color and you being an abstract
Yeah.
painter, we actually brought an example, Gil. If you can show us an example. Here's my friend Gil is going to be kind enough to hold Patricia's painting up for the camera. And tell us a little bit about this painting.
This is part of a series of pictures I did a couple of years ago. Let's see, 18 months ago. And one's called Bada Bada, this one's called Pitta Patta, one's called, they're all kind of alliterative. But my first grandson was, I painted this picture while I was waiting for him to be born. And so it was a very kind of delightful anticipation of this new baby, this new life. And so to me, you know, this is, the color is the song. There's two parts to this picture. There's the flow of it, and there's the color of it. And the color to me is sparkly and bright. It's got a bit of jelly beans in it and marbles.
Oh, that's
It's
what
got,
those are?
well, it's not. They're just spots, but they're just little.
I thought it was a
spots.
jelly bean.
But the color is like jelly bean colors.
Oh, I
and,
see.
And the
Okay.
channels are like, you know, those pinball machines and wheeling things and like those toys, kids, you know, those popcorn, it's little colored balls in a little covered thing, and you push it, it goes pop, 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 pop. So that this thing, it has sounds in it. A colleague of mine who does digital music actually composed a piece responsive to this, and he was seeing it as, you know, when you play a chord, there's a lingering sound, and so the darker
So this had an effect on on somebody.
Well, he composed a piece of music, reading it
That's amazing.
in sound, and he thought that the little spot elements were like percussion, and
Wow.
so he would use African and different percussion. So he kind of wove together a piece of music that kind of interacted in the way this thing does.
Wow.
And so, to me, all those things are real. You know, when people talk about realism and not realism, the thing about abstraction is that there's no... people want to know what a thing is. Like, what is it? And when they look at an abstract painting and they go, what is it? And Kandinsky's wonderful answer to that was, he said, why do you need to know what it is? A sunset is really beautiful. Do you really have to study the science of the curvature of the sun and gravity and the bending of the light rays and so on to appreciate a sunset? No, it just is beautiful. Just get over it. And I sort of feel that way too. And I think that for me, when I painted figuratively, there's a certain obedience required. I mean, this is not true for all painters. But for me, trying to get it right, I did portraits and so on. Trying to get it right, you're very carefully sort of copying from here to there. But when I'm painting an abstract painting, it's me and that picture, and there's nothing else in the room. And so I don't have the distraction, and I don't have to be obedient to some outside thing. I can just let the music of the color move me. And if I like it, I keep it, and if I hate it, I paint it out. Sometimes my best paintings are when it's just such a disaster, and so you feel liberated to just kind of cross that thing out with other colors.
So that's good you mentioned that, because that's the next question. Do you find any overriding commonalities between artists in general, despite their differences in style, subject, and approach? And you just talked about that in a way.
Well, I think it's my brother-in-law, my former brother-in-law, used to always talk about archetypes. Every once in a while people talk about archetypes. I'm afraid I have a few knee-jerk reactions when I'm lumped in with the archetypes, because I don't see it as a type. But I do know...
Well, commonalities between artists.
The commonality is something that I went to a talk by William Kennedy, the writer, who came actually to my school and spoke to the students. And and one of the students said, do you recommend writing as a career? And he said, absolutely not. He said, don't do it. Terrible idea. He said, being a writer is like crawling on your hands and knees from St. Petersburg to Moscow. You don't do it because you want to. You do it because you must. So don't ask me if you want, would I enjoy it? It's not a thing that you enter because you enjoy. And if there's one commonality...
You do it because you have to.
You do it because you have to.
So that's
and
you
it's
have
not,
an inner need.
Their talents...
They're born with it.
...is a dime a dozen. A lot of people have talent. But you have to have grit, and you have to want it more than anything. The best artists aren't necessarily the most precocious, Mozart notwithstanding, but they're the most persistent, who will do Pollock
Monet,
with an absolute
last
failure again and again and again. Everybody would have flunked him in high school. He was terrible. And then he was brilliant. And then he wasn't so great after a while. He fell off the deep end and so on. But still, that need to do it is the one quality all artists have.
He kept at it.
Not all of them have genius, perhaps. But that
stamina.
need is what sets an artist apart from other people.
Very interesting. So do you remember? So that brings to the next question. Do you recommend an art career for your students, your readers? Why or why not? That's sort of like you gave the answer.
Well, I think
to the
that
question.
I recommend it in the sense of what else are you going to do with your life? I mean, you could be a psychologist, or you could work for a bank, or you can be a financial analyst, and there's all those kinds of careers. But if you go into art, you're dealing with things that you're passionate about. For me, I get to spend my day talking about art to people. which is fabulous. I
So
get
do
to
do you fall under the category of you have to do it? You couldn't live without it?
No, because I think my gifts are, I have other gifts. You know, I love being a teacher. I think I was meant to be a teacher.
So you're an art teacher, you think?
I have, I can write.
Well, when you write a book, you're teaching.
And
Okay.
I write and I paint.
Mm-hmm.
The painting's from me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what I do with me and the canvas
Mm-hmm.
is a different world. When I go in that world, it's like writing an artist statement. I have strong feelings about artist statements.
Mm-hmm.
However, and I can be very critical of people's artist
Mm-hmm.
statements. But for myself, when I had to write an artist statement,
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say, look at the paintings. Like, what do you need to know? Like,
So-
it's all in the picture. Why talk about it?
And we talked about artist statements that you need. You know, one of the things I teach in my workshops, for instance, and I do give workshops here in Weathersfield and Glastonbury, for artist statements, one of the things I teach, for instance, that you have to have an artist statement, sort of like it's a business plan. If you're going to have a successful painting, you have to know why you're going to paint that. But you wrote something very interesting in the book, that sometimes artist statements are deceiving, and I love that, because I didn't think about that. So what is your take on
Well,
artist
sometimes
statements?
I find the artist statements have very little to do with the art, in which case it's bogus.
That they're doing, right?
It's like they're writing, it's sort of like when you go to a portfolio day, this is high school seniors or juniors, they go and they bring their work to show to different college reps and things like that. And you'll see the kids that come in with green hair, and they'll have, they look artsy. And they, and they have the look, they have the lingo, they hang out with other kids like that, they do a few illicit things that are sort of go with the territory. That doesn't mean they make art. Like, the art that they put out on the table is really the measure of whether they have talent or not. But some people, it's all in the look. They have the look. And they're interested in the look and the fashion, and it's sort of like a fashion statement or a political statement, maybe. But above that, you want it to be in the work. Like, I don't care usually to meet the artists. I don't mind meeting them after I've made an opinion of their art.
Right.
But it's very hard to be candid about something if you picture their poor little hurt face, if you're honest. Like, some very nice people make really terrible art. And some really horrible people that you don't even like them very much, do great things. And so if I have to have a relationship with one or the other, I want to have a relationship with the art and not with the artist. And I don't want to be biased in advance. I also don't think that as a critic, your value to an artist is to be an honest opinion of somebody that you didn't tell them what they were supposed to see when they looked at it first. Like, I come in cold. I come in with my innocent. I come in cold, and I'm looking at it, and I'm going to tell you my take. What did I see and perceive and feel?
That. Okay, we're going to have an experiment with that. So I wrote this book, Create a Painting for the Young Artist. We all know that already. And it's an art book for the young student who wants to think creatively. And one of the things I did in the book, though, I have this painting that I'm going to show you. I want you to give a critique, but we talked about artist statements now, and I thought the artist statement was important. And I actually, on the painting that I'm going to show you, I wrote an artist statement. So I'm going to go, and I forgot it already, but I'm going to reread it, and then I'll show you the painting. I enjoyed painting this window scene because it shows that color is in everything. Blue is my favorite color, and the other colors complement the blue quite well here. Again, a simple subject matter can be the inspiration for a creative painting. And I'll show, that was my artist statement. I forgot all about that. And even though this hangs up in my house, now I know why I painted it.
Now you remember.
Now, again, this I painted about 15 years ago. So be gentle. What is your professional critique on this youngster that painted the painting?
Well, had you been looking at Matisse when you did this? The windows and the shutters and the...
The painting turned out to be a little bit impressionistic. However, it's because at the time when I painted this, it's before I learned the book Painting on the Right Side of the Brain, when I actually painted this, not when I wrote the book, I did not know perspective that well, but I knew color quite well. So when you do impressionistic paintings, you don't really know, you don't have to know that much perspective, for some of them anyways. That's my feeling. So the color came out, so I'm happy you asked that question. And so it's like lack of knowledge that caused that. So I can't say I definitely knew him at the time, but...
Well, it's just the image reminds me of the way he sets up his pictures sometimes, and he does a lot. You know, there's an old trope that a painting, this is Western art, it's not true of the rest of the world, but a painting is a window on the world.
Oh, very interesting.
And this is the Roman, you know, the Roman frescoes and stuff. They would do frescoes on a large plaster wall, and they would paint a frame around it, and then they would paint a view out the window. And so windows, interestingly enough, have frames, and pictures have frames, and it's sort of that Western, it's, you know, in China they have scrolls, but you put a frame around it, and so you have to put a frame around a window because you've got to put a frame around a picture.
I'm happy you said that idea about window, because now that you mentioned it, I actually just realized that this other painting that I did has sort of like a window in it, even though it's a cave, but it's a looking out from behind something out into the world, and I see that that's a commonality between the two, and I didn't pick up on that. I'm so happy you said that.
And it's, this is like...
This is a grotto.
Did you see the Thomas Cole show at the Wadsworth in, I think, 95, 94?
I wasn't in the country in 1994.
There was a whole show of Thomas Cole, who's a early 19th century American romantic painter, and other people of that ilk. And it was about landscape painting, too. That was his favorite subject. But there's this waterfall that all the tourists, like they paint Niagara Falls, this waterfall. And most people do it from the outside looking at the waterfall, and there was a cave behind it. But he set up inside the waterfall, the cave looking out. And so it kind of reminds me of that picture a little bit.
That's true. There was a famous photo. Actually, that was based in a way on that idea that you just mentioned. There's a famous photo of the Dead Sea Scrolls where the picture was taken from inside the cave looking out at Qumran, which is the town that the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. So that was the backdrop behind that second painting. You know, I like that from inside looking out into the sun sort of idea.
Yeah, I like that second painting a lot.
Thank you. That is actually the grotto. It's called Rosh HaNikra in Israel. It's a very famous place. And you're in a grotto. It's on the Mediterranean. And you're looking out at these holes, sort of like
so
Monet.
Is there water in the bottom
Well, you know,
of the
Monet
cave?
painted that curtain
arch.
that arch, because in the Mediterranean you have all these arches and you have these caves where you can be on the inside looking out.
And is this water?
This is water.
Right,
And there's like a walkway on the inside. So this is the water, and you're looking out, and that's the Mediterranean Ocean over
Looks
there.
a little bit like Redon, too. You know, Redon.
So that's pretty cool. And one last question before we finish the program. I think the book is very poetic, and how, you know, is this book a personal journey, a memoir about your art experiences? What does it have for the reader? You know, how do you fit your artistic ability as a writer with your artistic ability as an artist and then your being an art teacher? So how does all of that combine into you, Patricia?
I talk about this a little in the last chapter, just kind of explaining how I got here from there.
Right.
And discovering modern and contemporary art was a long journey for me. And difficult. I had to really struggle to get to the other side, which is what made it really interesting, actually. And the thing is, I don't live in New York or L.A. or Chicago, any kind of place that would be called the center of the art world. I live in Hartford, and I wrote about Hartford. And so museums and galleries and places, you know, the Wadsworth and the New Britain Museum of American Art and the Real Artways and various other smaller galleries university galleries and so on. It's amazing how richly they bring to you the real deal.
We don't appreciate it.
We don't. And they bring it to you, and I think in the way, what is it they always say about the really name schools, the Ivies and so on, the kids all come, and they have, but they don't have to work very hard because the students they admit are so brilliant already.
Mm-hmm.
They say that they come in and drop off things and they come out. The school is richer and they're poor on the other side. Whereas other schools have to work harder.
Yeah.
And I think that the role of institutions, besides, preserving art, they really take it serious, the fact that they want to bring art to the people.
Mm-hmm.
I talk in one of my favorite artists in this book is Meryl Euclides. Mm-hmm. And Meryl she had a proposal to do maintenance art. She's an Orthodox Jew, actually. Mm-hmm. And she said, hook, line, and sinker, she bought the idea that the artist is a hero and they should be free to create and do this and that. And she said, even though she's an Orthodox Jew and there's all kinds of food restrictions and things on women in particular that you have to do, and then after she was married, she became pregnant and she realized that the kind of painting she was doing and the pigments were toxic. And that you had a higher responsibility to that unborn child, and you weren't free. Who are you kidding? You aren't free. And why is it only heroic to be like a rebel and a militant? Why can't people that take care of things be a hero? And so she created art that is based on caretaking. She learned from maintenance people. You learn the work is never done, she said. She choreographed a ballet for street sweepers. She covered them with mirrors so that the people standing on the sideline watching the parade used to bother her that they have parades, and then the street sweepers would come and sweep up the horse droppings that were left behind, and you were supposed to see those people. So she took the street sweepers and she covered them in mirrors so that you could see, you make the garbage guys. You guys stand on the side.
Oh, nice idea.
And then she choreographed, and their little lights spin around, and they played music, and they did, sort of like dressage, like they do with the Pizan horses and like that. So she's been for 2 or 3 decades the unpaid permanent artist in residence of the New York City Maintenance Department.
I could see that.
And so her art is performance art, but it has to do with caretaking. And Hartford was the museum that would let her come and do a project that is very famous. And these museums really take very much to heart the fact that there's a gulf between regular people and contemporary art and contemporary forms. And they want you to come here, let me sit with me. And I figure the point of this book is, come stand by me. Look where I'm looking. I'll tell you how to look. You can decide whether you think it's good or whatever you do. It's not stupid. It's really interesting. It's not what you think. It's not what it used to be. That doesn't mean it has no value. It doesn't mean it doesn't make you think. And so I wrote this book to be that, to be, just reserve judgment a little bit. Come with me, stand by me. Let's take a look and see what you think.
And with that, I like that. And so, as we do in all our shows when we end, we have you sign over your book to me, even though you did already, but you'll do it for the show.
I didn't put your name in.
Okay, but you didn't put my name in. There you go. It's Jason. And this was an amazing show, and I think you brought awareness to our local viewers about the art that's local. And actually you mentioned the museum in New Britain and the museum in Hartford, and I'm born in Hartford, and these are the museums that as a kid I grew up with. And today with my other jobs, I'm also an artist and an art teacher and wrote an art book, and I'm sure that had an influence on me. I remember my mother took me to the museum in Athenaeum when I was a kid.
Did you used to do art lessons there?
No, what happened was I wanted to see the Knights in Shining Armor.
Oh, yeah.
And I wanted to see then there was the Colt firearms exhibit, which they took out of the museum. And I would walk by the paintings at the time and say, yuck. but they were in my mind. And then later on, when I learned about art, I said, you know what, I saw that painting in the
Yeah.
Athenaeum. So
Sometimes it's like
great.
that. I know students can be very skeptical.
Mm-hmm.
And I figure that if a work is memorable enough, there will be a time later
There you go. That's what it
that
was.
it pops up and you go, you know, maybe I should think about that some more.
Well, I was exposed to it.
Yeah.
My mother exposed me. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure.